I speak now as an old man whose hands have trembled over many scrolls, whose eyes have watched countless suns sink behind the hills of Rome. And as I let my memory drift like candle smoke rising in a quiet chamber, I return to a night long ago, when I first understood that the life I dreamed of would never belong to me. It was the night I realized I would one day be emperor. It was late, and the marble floors of the imperial palace were cold beneath my sandals. I remember the faint echo of my footsteps blending with the distant hum of Roman life outside the walls. I was still a young man then, though my mind already felt older than my years. I carried scrolls pressed to my chest, hoping to spend the night studying philosophy. My heart longed for the quiet life of a scholar, a life spent in libraries, surrounded by the smell of parchment and dust, far from the noise of politics. But fate rarely asks what we want. I paused in a long corridor where the moonlight entered through a narrow opening above. The night air was cool, and I could hear the distant sound of rain beginning to fall upon the palace roof. The quiet rhythm reminded me of childhood evenings when I would sit alone under a stormy sky, listening to thunder and wondering about the nature of the universe. Even then I longed for understanding more than I longed for power. I sat beside a marble statue of an old philosopher whose name time has swallowed. His stone eyes looked endlessly forward, unblinking. Perhaps it was the stillness of the night or the uncertainty in my own heart, but I whispered aloud, "All I want is a life of study, not a throne." My voice felt small in those vast halls. I opened a worn scroll and read a line I would later write into my own thoughts. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. At that moment those words belonged not to me, but to the echoes of the Stoics who came before. Still, even then, I felt something stir inside me. A warning, perhaps, a reminder that everything, even our deepest desires, can be reshaped by the will of fate. As I read, I heard footsteps approaching. They were slow, measured, purposeful. When I looked up, I saw Hadrian himself walking toward me. His face was stern, his robe heavy, his presence commanding in the way that only an emperor's could be. I quickly rose, clutching the scrolls to my chest. Though he had spoken kindly to me before, there was always something in his gaze that searched deeper than appearances. He stopped before me and studied my face for a long moment. Then he said something I did not expect. "You carry too much gravity for a boy your age." I did not know how to answer. My throat tightened. He gestured toward the scrolls. "You wish to serve Rome with thought alone," he said. "But Rome will ask more of you." My heart sank. The words felt heavy, like a chain settling on my shoulders. I looked down at the floor, tracing the patterns in the marble, wishing for a different destiny. He stepped closer and lowered his voice, softened by something like compassion. "There is a strength in you," he said, "a steadiness the empire will need one day." Something inside me resisted. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to run to the quiet corners of the library and lose myself in studies. I wanted to remain invisible, unnoticed by the storms of politics. Instead, I felt a coldness spread through my chest. Hadrian placed his hand on my shoulder. "Do not fear the path ahead," he said. "Great burdens are given only to those who can bear them." When he left, his footsteps fading into silence, I found myself alone again in the dim corridor. But something had changed. The palace no longer felt like a place of learning. It felt like a vessel of destiny, guiding me toward a future I had not chosen. I walked slowly toward the courtyard where the rain had grown heavier. The scent of wet stone filled the air. The torches flickered in the breeze, their flames bending like bowing servants. I stood there in the cold and let the rain touch my face, wondering if nature was trying to cleanse the fear that clung to me. I remembered a teaching from the Stoics: "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." At that time, I did not fully understand the meaning. I was too young, too wrapped in my own longing for a simple life. But that night, those words echoed, as if whispered by the rain itself. The moon emerged briefly from behind the clouds, casting pale light over the gardens. The leaves glistened, and the water trickled down the stone paths like tiny rivers. I thought of my teachers, of the lessons they carved into my mind: self-command, discipline, acceptance. Even as a youth, these ideas shaped me, yet I felt them slipping through my fingers as fear tried to take their place. I whispered freely, as one does when no one is listening. What if I fail? What if I am not the man they believe I am? The laurel branches above swayed gently, shedding droplets that landed softly on my hands. The air smelled of earth and rain, grounding me. In that moment, I felt something warm inside my chest, not courage, but the beginning of it, a realization that fear was natural, human, unavoidable, and yet it was not meant to rule me. I read again from the scroll in my lap: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Those words would one day be mine, but on that night, they were my salvation. I repeated them to myself, letting them sink deeper with each breath. Power over my mind, not over fate, not over politics, not over destiny, only over myself. Slowly the trembling faded. I lifted my head and watched the rain falling through a shaft of moonlight. Each drop sparkled for an instant before disappearing into the darkness below. I realized then that my life would be much like that, rain, moments of brightness, moments of disappearance, all part of nature's endless cycle. And I understood something. Even if destiny had chosen a crown for me, I could still choose the kind of man who wore it. I rose from the bench, my clothes damp but my spirit quieter. The long hallway waited for me like a river returning to its course. I walked through the shadows toward my chamber, feeling the burden still heavy, but no longer suffocating. In my room a single candle burned. I watched its flame sway gently, its light warm against the cold night. I sat beside it, unrolled the scroll again, and let its teachings seep into me like heat into chilled skin. The candle hissed softly, releasing a thin thread of smoke that curled upward into the darkness. I followed its movement with my eyes and whispered, "If the gods will it, then let me be strong enough to meet it." That night did not make me emperor, but it prepared my soul for the day it would come. And now, as an old man remembering the sound of rain on marble, the loneliness of moonlit corridors, and the weight of Hadrian's gaze upon me, I understand the truth I could not grasp back then. We do not always choose our path, but we always choose how to walk it. That is the first lesson I ever learned on the road to becoming who I was meant to be. And it remains with me still, as steady as the flame of a candle in a quiet room, as soft as breath on a cold night, as eternal as the wisdom carved into a philosopher's stone. If life has placed a burden upon your shoulders, know this: you are stronger than you think. Fate does not choose the weak, it chooses the willing. And even if you never asked for the role you were given, you can meet it with dignity, with calm, and with the quiet courage that grows only through accepting what must be in the end. That night taught me not to run from my destiny, but to face it the way the laurel trees face the wind, with roots deep in the earth, and branches that bend but do not break. And I offer this memory to you now, hoping it brings comfort, strength, and a reminder that even the heaviest paths can be walked with grace. I speak now as an old man whose beard has turned the color of winter frost, and whose hands, once steady upon the sword and the scroll, tremble softly in the quiet of my final years. As the candle flickers beside me and the long corridors of memory open like ancient gates of marble, I return to the earliest season of my life, a season when I did not yet know the weight of an empire, but only the beating of a young heart that searched for meaning in every shadow and every silence. I remember waking before the sun, long before the servants stirred in the household of my grandfather. There was still dew upon the stones of the courtyard, and the cold morning air pressed against my cheeks like a gentle reminder that even in childhood, the world was vast and indifferent. Other children of Rome chased each other through the gardens, laughing, wrestling, shouting, but I was drawn instead to the dim corners where old philosophers sat wrapped in simple cloaks, whispering thoughts older than any empire. I would sit at their feet, my hands upon my knees, listening to voices that cracked like old papyrus as they spoke of virtue, of the soul, of reason, of the universe that pulsed silently above our heads. One of them said to me once, "The young oak grows straightest when the winds of thought bend it early." I did not fully understand his meaning then, but I felt the truth of it stir inside me as naturally as breath. At night, when others slept, I would light a small oil lamp and sit beside scrolls that smelled of dust and time. That small flame, wavering in the darkness, became my first companion in philosophy. Even now, as I sit in my old age, the memory of that flame comforts me more deeply than the company of any court or battlefield. It taught me that wisdom is not loud, it is quiet, like a whisper drifting through a silent library. My childhood was shaped not by games or trivial amusements, but by a soft sorrow that I could not name then. I sensed the fragility of life early, as if the gods themselves wished to prepare me for the burdens I would one day carry. I saw servants grow old and die, watched friends leave and never return, and listened to adults speak in hushed tones about loss and fate. Perhaps that is why I became reflective so young. I realized even as a boy that nothing we touch truly belongs to us, not our possessions, not our status, not even the people we love. I often wandered alone through the marble halls of Rome, tracing my fingers along cold pillars worn smooth by generations. I would pause before the statues' faces chiseled with stoic command. I wondered what storms had lived behind those stone eyes. I asked myself if courage was real, or merely a story we told to hide our trembling. I did not know it then, but these questions were the first seeds of the philosopher I would become. There was a garden behind our home where rainwater collected in shallow stone basins. During storms, I would stand beneath the overhang of the portico, watching the sky tear itself open. Lightning would cast its brief silver glow over olive branches, and thunder would roll like the voice of Jupiter himself. Instead of fear, I felt something like awe. The storm taught me humility, how small a child is beneath the cosmos, how vulnerable, how temporary. Even now I remember the words I whispered to myself as the rain poured down. If the universe is this vast, then my troubles must be small. Years later, I would write something similar in my meditations. Look at the stars running their courses with unfailing order, and remind yourself that you too must live according to nature. I understand those words more deeply now, but their seed lived in me even as a child. My teachers noticed my solemn nature. They said I was too serious for my age, too quiet, too observant, but I preferred silence to noise. I preferred scrolls to games. I preferred sitting beside old men who smelled of parchment and smoke rather than running with boys who cared for nothing but victory in childish contests. I felt older than my years, not in body, but in soul. Perhaps this is why Hadrian later saw something unusual in me, but that is a story for another time. There was one philosopher-king whom I admired more than the rest, though I met him later in my youth. But even as a child I longed for a guide like him, someone who would shape not my mind only, but my character. Still, the early years guided me well enough. I learned to sit with discomfort, to endure hunger during long lessons, to hold my tongue when frustrated, to observe my impulses rather than obey them. I did not know the word stoic then, but the practices were already forming within me like the first cracks in a block of marble that would one day reveal a sculpted figure. When I felt lonely, which was often, I would lie beneath the shade of a fig tree and watch dust float in the sunlight. The world felt so peaceful in those small moments, and yet I sensed something waiting for me beyond that peace. A destiny approaching like slow, inevitable footsteps echoing across the years. I did not want power. I wanted simplicity. I wanted quiet. I wanted a life spent reading in warm rooms filled with scrolls and incense. But fate rarely consults the desires of a child. One evening, as the sun sank behind the terracotta roofs of Rome, my mother found me alone in the courtyard holding a broken wax tablet. I had dropped it earlier and felt ashamed. She knelt beside me and said, "Marcus, do not mourn what cannot be restored. The world gives, and the world takes. Your task is to remain steady." Her voice trembled slightly, though she spoke with strength. That night I wrote in my early notes the thought that would later become a line in meditations: accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together. Even now I feel the warmth of her hand on my shoulder as I wrote those words. My childhood passed slowly, gently, like a long golden sunset. I learned that sorrow can shape the heart without breaking it, that loneliness can deepen the spirit rather than hollow it, that quiet observation brings more wisdom than loud ambition. I learned that the mind is a kingdom more vast than any territory Rome could ever conquer. The greatest lesson came one autumn evening when I sat beneath the starlit sky, feeling unusually heavy with thoughts. I remember whispering a passage from a scroll I had memorized. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. I asked myself then, what color do I wish my soul to be? And I realized that virtue is not something a man stumbles upon in adulthood. It is crafted in childhood, shaped by small choices, quiet reflections, and the willingness to look inward even when the world demands outward noise. Now as I sit in the dim light of this room, hearing the faint crackle of the candle and feeling the softness of old age settle over me like a worn cloak, I look back on that child with tenderness. He did not know what storms awaited him: war, plague, loss, betrayal. He did not know he would someday hold dying soldiers in frozen tents, or bury children he loved, or carry the weight of an entire empire on weary shoulders. But that child prepared me. His quiet days, his lonely reflections, his early fascination with virtue, these became my armor in the years when life grew heavy. And so I say this now to those who listen in their own advancing years. The child you once were still walks beside you. His fears, his hopes, his small discoveries, they are part of you still. If you close your eyes, you can hear him in the rustle of old memories, in the stillness of early morning, in the hush of your final thoughts before sleep. Hold him gently. He carried you this far, and in the end, when all fades, you will realize what I learned long ago under the Roman sky: that the soul of a child can contain the wisdom of an old man, just as the soul of an old man can still contain the wonder of a child.